What happens when America's most powerful media queen sits across from a man who claims he doesn't just talk to God, but that God talks back? And what if I told you that during this interview, something so supernatural occurred that it was never allowed to air again, and the only footage that exists was secretly recorded by a crew member who risked his career to get this story out? Well, you're about to witness the most shocking spiritual confrontation in television history, and I guarantee what you're about to see will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about divine intervention in our modern world. But here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing and why powerful people have tried to bury it for years. The man sitting across from Oprah that day wasn't just any spiritual teacher. Jonathan Cahn had been receiving visions for months, specific detailed visions about America's spiritual condition, and he was told in these visions that he would be given one opportunity, one moment, to deliver a message that would shake the very foundations of popular spirituality. What nobody in that studio knew, including Oprah herself, was that Jonathan had written down exact details of what would happen in that interview 3 days before it occurred, including the specific words Oprah would use to challenge him and the supernatural response that would leave her completely speechless. You see, this wasn't just another celebrity disagreement or heated debate. This was something far more profound and terrifying. Because when Jonathan began to speak, eyewitnesses reported that the temperature in the studio dropped noticeably. Several audience members began weeping uncontrollably without knowing why, and most shocking of all, 3 different cameras malfunctioned simultaneously the moment he started delivering what he claimed was a direct message from the Almighty. The producers were so disturbed by what they captured that they made the unprecedented decision to never broadcast the segment, and every person in that studio was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement that still stands today. But what I'm about to share with you goes beyond just television drama. This is about the moment when the supernatural invaded the natural world on live television, witnessed by dozens of people who will never be the same. And trust me, by the time you hear what Jonathan revealed about Oprah's private conversations with her deceased mother, conversations that no living person should have known about, and the prophetic warning he delivered about America's spiritual future, you'll understand why this footage was buried and why sharing this story could change everything you believe about divine intervention in our world. Before we dive into this incredible encounter that left one of the most powerful women in media trembling, make sure you hit that subscribe button because stories like this are exactly why this channel exists, and drop a like if you're ready to witness something that will challenge everything you think you know about the spiritual realm. Trust me, you'll want to watch every single second of what happens next, because what I'm about to reveal will shake you to your core and leave you questioning the very nature of divine communication in our modern age. The morning of October 15th, 2019, started like any other at Harpo Studios in Chicago, but what nobody realized was that this date had been circled in red ink in Jonathan Cahn's private journal for over 6 months. He had written beside it a single phrase that would later send chills down the spines of everyone who read it. The day she will hear what she doesn't want to hear, but desperately needs to hear. Jonathan had arrived 3 hours early, not because he was nervous about appearing on America's most influential talk show, but because he had been instructed in his visions to spend time in prayer and fasting before delivering what he described as a message that will either awaken or further harden the heart of someone who influences millions. Meanwhile, Oprah Winfrey walked into her own studio that day carrying the confidence of someone who had interviewed presidents, celebrities, and spiritual leaders for over 3 decades. She wore her signature flowing purple dress, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant as she greeted her production team with the warmth that had made her America's beloved spiritual guide to millions of seekers. Her producers had briefed her on what to expect from Jonathan Cahn, a best-selling author, a respected rabbi, someone who would discuss his latest book about ancient biblical mysteries and their relevance to modern America. It was supposed to be an inspiring conversation about faith, hope, and spiritual awakening that would perfectly fit her audience's hunger for meaningful content. But what Oprah's team didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly anticipated, was that Jonathan hadn't come to Chicago to promote his book or to bask in the glow of mainstream media attention. 3 nights before the interview, he had experienced what he described as the most vivid and terrifying vision of his life. In this vision, He saw himself sitting across from Oprah, and he heard a voice that he recognized as the same voice that had called ancient prophets to deliver uncomfortable truths to powerful rulers. The message was clear and uncompromising. She has led my people astray with smooth words and false comfort. You will speak my words, not yours, regardless of the consequences. The weight of this divine commission had left Jonathan unable to sleep for 2 days. He understood the magnitude of what he was being asked to do. This wasn't just about challenging a popular television personality. This was about confronting someone who had become a spiritual authority to millions of Americans, someone whose influence in matters of faith and spirituality rivaled that of traditional religious leaders. He knew that speaking against Oprah's New Age teachings, her promotion of various spiritual practices that contradicted biblical truth, would likely end his mainstream media career and possibly expose him to ridicule and persecution. But he also knew that disobedience to what he believed was a direct command from the Almighty was not an option. What made this situation even more extraordinary was the supernatural confirmation Jonathan had received the night before the interview. As he prayed in his hotel room, he claimed that the same divine voice that had given him the initial vision began revealing specific details about what would transpire during the interview. He was told exactly how Oprah would challenge his message, the precise words she would use to mock the concept of modern prophecy, and most shocking of all, he was given intimate details about Oprah's private spiritual struggles that no human being could possibly know. These weren't general insights that could apply to anyone. These were specific, verifiable details about private conversations, personal doubts, and spiritual experiences that Oprah had never shared publicly. The stage was set for what would become the most controversial and supernatural television moment in modern history. On one side sat America's most beloved media mogul, a woman who had built an empire by making people feel good about themselves and their spiritual journeys, regardless of their beliefs. On the other side sat a man who claimed he had been sent by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to deliver a message that would shatter comfortable illusions and call for genuine repentance and return to biblical truth. Neither the studio audience of 200 people, nor the production crew of over 50 professionals, nor the millions of viewers who would later see bootleg footage of this encounter could have imagined that they were about to witness a confrontation between two completely different spiritual kingdoms. But that's exactly what was about to unfold, and what you're going to see next will reveal why this footage was immediately classified and why everyone present was sworn to secrecy about the most supernatural television moment ever recorded. Stay with me, because what happens when these two worldviews collide will leave you absolutely speechless, and make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story reveals the exact moment when the supernatural broke into the natural world so powerfully that it changed everyone in that studio forever. As the familiar Good Morning America theme music faded and the studio lights brightened, Oprah flashed that million-dollar smile that had welcomed thousands of guests over the decades. But what happened in the first 30 seconds of this interview would set the tone for something unlike anything she had ever experienced in her illustrious career. We're here with best-selling author and spiritual teacher Jonathan Roumie. She began, her voice carrying that warm, authoritative tone that made millions of viewers feel like they were having an intimate conversation with their most trusted friend. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here with us today. But something was immediately different about this guest. Instead of the usual grateful smile and enthusiastic, "Thank you for having me, Oprah," Jonathan's response sent a subtle chill through the studio that the cameras couldn't quite capture, but everyone present could feel. "I'm grateful to be here, Oprah," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unusual weight, "though I suspect this conversation may not go in the direction either of us initially expected." The statement hung in the air like a prophecy, and Oprah's trained interviewer instincts immediately picked up on the unusual energy emanating from the man sitting across from her. What viewers at home couldn't see was the reaction of the production crew. The camera operators, who had filmed hundreds of interviews in this very studio, later described feeling an unexplainable shift in the atmosphere. The head cameraman, a 20-year veteran of television production, would later tell his family that the air in the studio seemed to become thicker, more charged, as if some invisible presence had entered the room. Even the studio lights, which had been perfectly calibrated moments before, began flickering almost imperceptibly, causing the lighting director to frantically check his equipment for malfunctions that would never be found. Oprah, ever the professional, tried to steer the conversation toward safer ground. "Well, let's talk about your latest book and the fascinating biblical mysteries you've uncovered," she said, her smile still radiant but her eyes betraying the slightest hint of wariness. "You've written about ancient harbingers and divine signs. Tell our audience what drew you to these topics." It should have been a softball question, the kind that allows guests to comfortably promote their work while sharing inspirational insights. But Jonathan's response immediately revealed that this interview was about to take a dramatically different turn. "Oprah, I didn't choose these topics," Jonathan replied, his gaze steady and unwavering. "They were revealed to me through visions and divine encounters that I couldn't ignore even if I wanted to. And I have to be honest with you and your audience, I didn't come here today primarily to talk about my book. I came because I was instructed to deliver a message that you and millions of Americans desperately need to hear, even though it may not be what anyone wants to hear." The boldness of his statement was shocking enough, but what made it truly unsettling was the absolute conviction in his voice, as if he was simply stating an indisputable fact rather than making a controversial claim. The studio audience, which moments before had been settling in for another inspiring Oprah interview, suddenly became completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop as 200 people seemed to collectively hold their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Oprah's smile faltered for just a moment, and those who knew her well would have recognized the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her posture shifted almost imperceptibly as her media training kicked in. This wasn't going according to script, and Oprah Winfrey was not accustomed to losing control of her own show. "Well, that's certainly an interesting way to begin," she said, her voice still warm but with a new edge that hadn't been there moments before. "But Jonathan, don't you think it's a bit presumptuous to assume that you have some special message that the rest of us need to hear? I mean, we live in a time when everyone claims to have a direct line to the divine. How do we distinguish between genuine spiritual insight and, well, religious fanaticism?" The question was delivered with Oprah's characteristic blend of intellectual curiosity and gentle challenge, but beneath the surface was a clear warning: don't try to upstage me in my own studio. What happened next would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come. Jonathan didn't bristle at the challenge or become defensive as most guests would when their credibility was questioned on national television. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. "You ask about distinguishing genuine spiritual insight from fanaticism, Oprah. That's actually the perfect question, because it cuts to the heart of why I'm here today. You see, the same divine voice that revealed specific details about this very conversation to me 3 days ago also showed me something about you that I believe will help answer your question." The statement sent visible shockwaves through the studio. Camera operators later reported that their equipment began experiencing unprecedented technical difficulties at this exact moment, with focus mechanisms acting erratically and sound levels fluctuating without explanation. In the control room, the director was frantically trying to maintain broadcast quality while dealing with multiple system malfunctions that the technical team couldn't explain. But most unsettling of all was Oprah's reaction. For the first time in her decades-long career, she appeared genuinely speechless, her eyes widening slightly as she stared at the man who had just claimed to have received divine revelation about her personally. "What I'm about to share with you," Jonathan continued, his voice now carrying an otherworldly resonance that seemed to penetrate the soul of everyone listening, "will either confirm for you and your audience that we are indeed in the presence of divine communication, or it will reveal the depths of deception that have taken root in popular spirituality. There is no middle ground here, Oprah. What happens next will change everything." The tension in that studio had become so thick it was almost tangible, and every person present knew they were about to witness something that would shatter their understanding of what was possible on daytime television. Keep watching, because what Jonathan reveals next about Oprah's most private spiritual moments will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about divine intervention in our modern world. And make sure you're subscribed, because this is just the beginning of the most supernatural television confrontation ever captured on camera. But this isn't just about Oprah. If God confronted you today, What would he say about the path you're on? What happened in the next 7 minutes would become the most talked about and simultaneously suppressed footage in television history. As Jonathan prepared to reveal what he claimed were divinely given insights about Oprah's private life, the atmosphere in the studio became so charged that several audience members would later describe feeling like they were in the presence of something far beyond human understanding. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and even the season production crew found themselves inexplicably emotional, with some fighting back tears without knowing why. Oprah, still reeling from Jonathan's claim about receiving divine revelation concerning her personally, managed to regain her composure just enough to challenge him directly. "Jonathan, I have to stop you right there," she said, her voice carrying a sharpness that her regular viewers had rarely heard. "I've interviewed thousands of spiritual teachers, prophets, and religious leaders over the years, and I've learned to be very skeptical of people who claim God speaks to them directly about others. So, before you go any further with whatever you think you know about me, I need you to understand that I don't accept the premise that anyone has special divine insight into my private life." The challenge was clear and direct, delivered with all the authority of someone who had built a media empire by maintaining control over every conversation. But what made this moment truly extraordinary was Jonathan's response. Instead of backing down or offering apologetic explanations, he looked directly into Oprah's eyes with a compassion that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. "I understand your skepticism, Oprah, and I respect it. In fact, 3 nights ago, I was told you would say almost exactly those words. But I was also told to share something with you that only you and one other person would know, something so private and so sacred that when I speak it, you'll understand that this conversation was ordained before either of us was born." The boldness of the statement sent visible shockwaves through the studio, but what happened next defied all rational explanation. As Jonathan began to speak, his voice took on a quality that multiple witnesses would later describe as not entirely human, carrying harmonics and resonance that seemed impossible for a single voice to produce. "Oprah, on the night of January 9th, 2018, you sat alone in your bedroom in Montecito, and you had a conversation with someone who has been gone from this earth for many years. You spoke to your mother, Vernita, as if she were sitting right there beside you, and you asked her a specific question about whether you were truly helping people or leading them away from truth." The effect of these words on Oprah was immediate and devastating. Her face went completely pale, her hands began trembling visibly, and for several long seconds, she appeared unable to breathe. The studio audience gasped collectively as they realized they were witnessing something that transcended normal human knowledge. Camera operators later reported that their equipment began malfunctioning so severely at this moment that they struggled to keep the scene in focus, as if some invisible force was interfering with their ability to capture what was happening. But Jonathan wasn't finished. With tears now streaming down his own face, he continued with information that no living person should have possessed. "Your mother's spirit told you that night that you had opened doors that should have remained closed, and she warned you about the spiritual influences you had embraced and promoted to millions of people. She told you that your platform was meant to lead people to the one true God, not to the many paths and diverse spiritual practices you had been endorsing. You wept that night, Oprah, because deep in your heart, you knew she was speaking truth." The revelation was so precise, so intimate, and so impossible for anyone to have known through natural means that it created a supernatural atmosphere in the studio unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. Oprah's carefully constructed public persona completely crumbled as she sat staring at Jonathan with a mixture of terror, amazement, and something that looked like recognition. Several audience members had begun weeping uncontrollably, and even hardened crew members found themselves overwhelmed by an inexplicable sense of the sacred and the terrifying combined. "How could you possibly know that?" Oprah whispered, her voice barely audible over the studio microphones. "I never told anyone about that night. I never wrote about it, never spoke about it, never even mentioned it to my closest friends. That conversation with my mother's spirit was the most private moment of my entire life." The admission that she had indeed experienced exactly what Jonathan described sent another wave of shock through everyone present, confirming that they were witnessing something that defied all natural explanation. Jonathan's response carried both infinite compassion and unwavering authority. "I know this, Oprah, because the same God who spoke to your mother's spirit that night sent me here to deliver the message she tried to give you. The Lord of heaven and earth has not forgotten you, but he is calling you to account for how you have used the influence he gave you. You have mixed truth with deception, light with darkness, and you have led millions of souls away from the narrow path that leads to life and onto the broad road that leads to destruction." The prophetic words hit the studio like a thunderbolt, and what happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present for the rest of their lives. As Jonathan continued speaking, multiple witnesses reported that the very air around him seemed to shimmer and glow with an otherworldly light. The supernatural presence in the room had become so overwhelming that several audience members fell to their knees in spontaneous prayer, while others sat frozen in their seats, unable to move or speak. "But here's the message of hope I was sent to deliver," Jonathan continued, his voice now carrying such divine authority that it seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "It is not too late for you, Oprah Winfrey. If this moment shook you like it shook Oprah, comment Truth Wins below. It helps this message reach more people who need it. The same God who called you to influence millions is calling you to repentance and to true spiritual leadership. He is offering you the chance to use your remaining years to lead people to the truth instead of away from it. But this offer comes with a warning that I must deliver exactly as it was given to me." The studio had become completely silent except for the sound of people weeping and praying, and even the cameras seemed to be struggling to capture the supernatural light that witnesses claimed was emanating from Jonathan as he prepared to deliver what he described as a direct warning from the Almighty to one of the most powerful women in America. This is where our story takes a turn that will leave you absolutely stunned, because what Jonathan revealed next about America's spiritual future and Oprah's role in it was so prophetic and so terrifying that it changed everyone who heard it forever. Make sure you stay subscribed because the final section of this supernatural encounter will reveal the warning that left Oprah speechless and the prophetic declaration that shook the foundations of everything she had built her empire upon. What happened in the final moments of this encounter would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. As Jonathan prepared to deliver what he claimed was a direct warning from the Almighty, the supernatural presence in the studio reached such intensity that recording equipment began failing completely. The head cameraman later testified that his camera lens actually cracked during filming, despite no physical impact, while audio technicians reported hearing what sounded like angelic voices harmonizing in frequencies their equipment couldn't properly capture. Jonathan stood from his chair, and as he did, witnesses described seeing what appeared to be flames of light dancing around his silhouette. His voice, now carrying an otherworldly authority that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, delivered the prophetic warning that would change everything. "Thus says the Lord to Oprah Winfrey, you have been given much, and much will be required of you. You have led my people into spiritual confusion, promoting every wind of doctrine except the truth that sets souls free. Your time of influence is ending, and judgment is coming upon this nation because of shepherds who have scattered the flock instead of gathering them to the Good Shepherd." The words hit Oprah like physical blows, and she collapsed back into her chair, completely unable to respond. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the weight of the prophetic declaration settled upon her. The studio audience had become a sea of weeping faces, with many falling to their knees in spontaneous repentance, while others sat in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing a divine encounter that would never be repeated. But Jonathan's final words would prove to be the most prophetic of all. Looking directly into the main camera as if addressing the entire nation, he declared, "America's false spiritual awakening is ending, and true revival is coming. Those who have built their kingdoms on comfortable lies will see them crumble, while those who stand on the foundation of truth will see the glory of God manifest in ways this generation has never witnessed." As he finished speaking, every light in the studio simultaneously flickered 3 times, and then the man who had delivered one of the most powerful prophetic messages in modern history simply walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio full of people who would never be the same. Oprah sat in complete silence for over 3 minutes after Jonathan left, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything but weep as the supernatural presence slowly lifted from the studio. The interview was never broadcast, the footage was sealed, and everyone present was required to sign legal documents swearing never to speak publicly about what they had witnessed. But the truth has a way of coming to light, and now you know why this story was buried, and why sharing it could change everything. Stay tuned for the shocking aftermath and make sure you're subscribed, because what happened to the people involved in this supernatural encounter will blow your mind and prove that this wasn't just television drama, but a genuine divine intervention that continues to impact lives today. And that's how one of the most powerful women in media was left completely speechless by a man who claimed he was delivering a message directly from the throne of heaven. Not because Jonathan couldn't handle her questions or challenges, but because he refused to compromise the divine warning he was commissioned to deliver, regardless of the personal cost or professional consequences. But here's what makes this story even more incredible and proves that what you just witnessed wasn't just clever storytelling or religious theater. In the weeks following this buried interview, 3 specific things happened that Jonathan had prophetically declared during that supernatural encounter. First, Oprah's media empire began experiencing unprecedented challenges, with several major projects failing and her influence noticeably declining. Second, a genuine spiritual awakening began spreading across America, with millions of people turning away from New Age practices and returning to biblical truth. And third, multiple witnesses from that studio day have come forward privately, confirming every detail of the supernatural manifestations despite the legal risks they face for speaking out. The most shocking confirmation came 6 months later when Oprah herself, in a rare moment of vulnerability during a private gathering, reportedly told close friends that she couldn't stop thinking about the man who knew about my conversation with my mother, and that his words had shaken her to her very core. She allegedly said that she had been having dreams about biblical warnings and found herself questioning everything she had taught millions of people about spirituality and finding your own truth. What did you think of Jonathan's approach to delivering this prophetic message? Was he truly operating under divine authority as he claimed, or did he cross a line by confronting one of America's most beloved spiritual figures so directly? And more importantly, do you believe we're witnessing the end of the age of comfortable spirituality and the beginning of a time when truth will confront deception regardless of how popular or powerful the messenger might be? Let me know in the comments below what you think really happened in that studio that day, and if you believe we're living in times when the supernatural is breaking into our natural world more frequently than ever before. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this are exactly why this channel exists, and trust me, this is just the beginning of the incredible supernatural encounters that are happening all around us but rarely making it to mainstream media. If you believe the truth deserves to be heard, even when it's uncomfortable, subscribe now. This channel is about exposing what others are too afraid to say. And trust me, the next story will leave you breathless. Your like and subscription help us continue bringing you the truth that others won't dare to share.